Nobody can say for sure right now how good the Jets are going to be in 2025. We have a full offseason to add players, but there are some early indicators that might tell us what kind of team we're looking at. We'll talk about the 2025 Jets ahead here on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, March 5th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're going to do our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in your questions. First question, John, how do you feel about the Jets at this early stage? I know we have to go through the draft and free agency, but are you optimistic or pessimistic right now about the team's chances in 2025? And that's a great question. And, as you mentioned, we don't have the full team yet. We've got a lot of moves that need to be made. We have a new head coach and a new general manager, so that adds a lot to the variance. It could mean that the team has a higher ceiling than people expect. It could mean the team has a lower floor than people expect. But I have a few thoughts on the 2025 Jets, because right now it kind of feels like the fan base is divided into one of two camps. And I actually think both of these camps are wrong. There's the camp that says the Jets are doomed now because Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams are gone. We're tanking this year. We're going to have a top 5 pick. I don't agree with that. And then there's another camp, and this camp just got big news because the Jets cut Davante Adams, and they're saying, well, Jets are in great cap shape. We're top 10 in cap space in the league. We're all set. I don't think either of these is really accurate. So let me start by talking about the people who are excited about the cap space and how everything's now we're in good shape cap wise. You can't just look at the raw number. And we talked a little bit about this on yesterday's show. You can't just look at the raw number of cap space you have, because the Jets technically may be in the top 10 in cap space in the NFL, but they have a lot of needs. It's you have to combine the needs with the amount of money you have. This was a mistake people made constantly when Mike Maccagnan was the general manager, because the Jets were among the league leaders in cap space for most of Mike Maccagnan's tenure, and Maccagnan was treated as like some sort of cap visionary. In reality, it wasn't because he was managing the cap all that well. It's because he didn't have any good players who commanded big contracts. That's the real. I mean, it's easy to have a lot of cap space if you don't have good players. Now, the current Jets team has good players, but they're almost all on rookie contracts. So almost all the good players for this team are cheap. What the Jets don't have are good veteran players on their second and third contracts for the most part, outside of Quinnen Williams. Might be able to find another exception or two. You could say $52 million. Jets don't have a quarterback right now. Jets don't have 2 of their 3 starting receivers on the team right now. Jets don't have a right tackle right now. On the defensive side of the ball, Jets don't have a starting defensive tackle. Jets don't have a pair of rotational defensive tackles who are going to take up big snaps. Jets need a third defensive end to rotate in with Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson. I mean, look, maybe you want to bring CJ Mosley back. I don't. I want to bring Jamie Sherwood back. And if I don't bring Jamie Sherwood back, I want an upgrade on Mosley right now. Jets don't have a number 2 corner right now. Jets don't have a safety. Jets need at least 1 safety, maybe 2, because I don't know that I really want Tony Adams playing safety. You could go either way on that. So you can't sit there and say the Jets are set because they have $52 million. And you also have to look at like the cap situation where Jets already have $30 million in dead money. And that's not even including the Aaron Rodgers portion of it. And when Rodgers is a post-June 1st cut, we're up to $44 million. And that's before they potentially make other cuts. I mean, they handled a lot of their contract structures very poorly. Tyler Conklin's going to count against the cap next year. DJ Reed's going to count against the cap next year. Those are some of the better ones. Davante Adams is going to count against the cap next year. Javon Kinlaw is going to count against the cap next year. Mike Williams is going to count against the cap next year. Very poor cap management by Joe Douglas. I mean, to have this much dead money already, and we haven't even gotten into the offseason where the Jets are going to cut other guys and add to that total. Get dead money is really, you're paying for a guy for what they did in the past. The Jets are paying these guys to go 5-12. So the cap situation is not great. On the other hand, I can't say that the Jets are doomed now, that they're heading to the bottom of the league, because they went 5-12 with Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams this past season, and Rodgers wasn't good. He's, I mean, you can cherry pick statistics, but overall, the result was very underwhelming. I mean, I think the most charitable case is maybe you can like scratch out a case if like you really squint, where you could say he was an above average, or he was an average quarterback. He's not an above average quarterback anymore, and he's trending down. And I don't know that it's going to get better age 41, turning 42 during the season. And Devontae Adams, that'll hurt, but what could you do? Devontae Adams doesn't want to be here. I mean, Devontae Adams showed you with the Raiders last year how interested he is in playing in a situation where he's not with Aaron Rodgers. He pretty much just quit on the team early in this. It wasn't even like the Raiders were out of the race at that point. He just quit on the team early in the season because he wanted to come to New York and play with Rodgers. So, Adams can still play. He'll probably help some team next year, but he couldn't return. But you look across the rest of the roster, there is talent here, and Joe Douglas did not live up to the hype. I think we know that. I think that's fair. Joe Douglas was not good enough as a GM. Joe Douglas could not build the Jets into a winning team. Didn't have a winning record any of the seasons he had here. But Joe Douglas did improve the talent base. Joe Douglas was a big step up on Mike McCagnon and John Idzik. And now you have players like Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson and Jermaine Johnson and Breece Hall and Elijah Vera Tucker and Joe Tippmann and Michael Carter II. And, how good these guys are vary, but these are all quality young players. And, Joe Douglas failed in a lot of areas, but when you have that base of talent, you're not doomed. You have pieces that you can actually build around, and you have players good enough that unless you suffer a million injuries or, you have Jeff Ulbricht's caliber coaching, you're not going to win 3 games. And Rodgers is not going to be that hard to replace. I mean, that was one of the baffling things was when people would ask, well, who are you going to get that's better than Rodgers? And Rodgers' production was like that of a veteran journeyman. You don't need to pay Rodgers $37.5 million to get that production. You can get that production from some guy who's bounced around the league for far cheaper. I don't think like either of these perspectives are accurate. I don't think the Jets are doomed. I don't think the Jets are in great cap situation. I think next year's going to be a challenge. Now, hopefully Aaron Glenn is as good of a coach as we're all hoping he'll be. And if he is, and if he motivates the team, and if, Jets get a little luck, I think the Jets have a chance to be a very competitive team next year. And I think that they'll be a tough out if, again, if Glenn's as good as we're hoping he is. And the one thing that's good for the Jets is like this perception that they're heading for a 3-win season. Because for the first time in a really long time, expectations aren't through the roof. And this is been one of my big complaints about the Jets through the years, that the Jets have been the ultimate overpromise and underdeliver team. The Jets, and they're as guilty of this as anybody. They set the expectations sky high, things that can't be met, and sometimes these manifest themselves in ridiculous ways. Like like when they tried to like make it sound like Aaron Rodgers was going to come back in season from the Achilles injury. For the first time in a while, it seems like expectations are low around here, and that's not a bad thing because it means that the Jets can actually be a pleasant surprise instead of an enormous disappointment. Wouldn't that be nice if the Jets were actually a pleasant surprise for once? I think it would be. So all this is to say that, the Jets have a chance to be a very respectable team this year. And the cap situation is not great right now. But once those other contracts work themselves through the system, get off the books, Jets could be in a situation, if they're smart if they handle this offseason in a smart way, they could be in a situation where the cap situation is very healthy a year from now. And that's one of the things in the NFL, for the most part, even if you have a bad cap, it just takes a year to clear it out. I think the Jets, I trend more look, we don't know how good Glenn is. We don't know how good Muji is. We don't know what the Jets are going to do this offseason. But I think the pieces are in place for the Jets to be a very pleasant surprise this next season. And I know that's tough to hear because Jets never pleasantly surprise us at all. But I don't know. I think that there's a real possibility of things potentially going in the right direction. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to what the Jets can do with their limited resources. What should they prioritize? I have a thought on not just a position, but a certain role that really is something they should look at. And I'll talk about what that is as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supply for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. Auto ship is a game changer. You could set automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so you never run out. You can easily change it or cancel at any time. And Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet healthy and happy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 off your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required, new customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question: with Devontae Adams gone and Allen Lazard to follow, the wide receiver room is looking bleak. Who are some budget free agents you are hoping to see signed or drafted, and what's the cost? Are there any players in the second round you would target if we don't take Ted McMillan at 7? So really good question there. And yeah, the wide receiver room after Garrett Wilson's not looking very good. Now, the one thing I'd say if you want to go glasses half full is in the past, the wide receiver room just looked bad, period. We didn't have a guy, a 1,000-yard receiver in Garrett Wilson that we could start with. Losing Adams certainly hurts. I actually would question the premise of this one a little bit, because it seems to imply that losing Allen Lazard makes the wide receiver room bad, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I think things would look just as bleak if Allen Lazard was around. There are no easy answers out there. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I would have done the trade the Commanders did for Deebo Samuel. They gave up a 5 and take Deebo Samuel at about a $17 million cap hit. And I know Deebo has been down the last couple of years, but I think he's a good player. And this is going to be controversial because I'm going to criticize one of the best offensive coaches in the league. But I think one of Deebo's problems in San Francisco became that Kyle Shanahan just got too cute with him and tried to move him around too much instead of just letting him work as a receiver. There are no obvious answers. I mean, I mentioned T. Higgins, but it sounds like he's going back to Cincinnati. It sounds like he's getting the franchise tag in Cincinnati. I mentioned the other day, Chris Godwin, and it sounds like there's a chance he shakes free, and the Jets, are going to have to limit where they target players. But receiver's a spot where I actually would look to target a big name like Chris Godwin, who's still on the right side of 30 and is still playing at a really high level. If you don't go in that direction, though, I mean, you probably have to go just with one of the older guys and just hope you can squeeze one more good year out of him. I mean, there's some rumors that Cooper Kupp may be a cap casualty with the Rams. And look, he's been, he's not where he was at his peak the year they won the Super Bowl, where he was the best receiver in the NFL. But it's still a guy who's productive. I mean, you got to get someone in here who knows how to run a route. You can't run out there with Garrett Wilson and Xavier Gibson and then whatever behind him. You got to get somebody in here who knows how to run around. I mean, would you look to maybe squeeze another year out of Keenan Allen? I mean, he seems like he's kind of on the down slope, but still probably better. No easy answers. And I don't love the idea of looking to the second round of the draft. And let me explain. You actually have a decent shot of getting a day one starter in the second round. I'm not saying that you don't, but that's different from saying we have to count on this guy. It's one thing to say we got a decent shot, and if it works out, that's great. If not, then we're not doomed. But if you're drafting a guy in the second round and he has to be an immediate starter, that's awfully risky. I mean, I think the guys who would be available in that range might be a Trey Harris out of Ole Miss or an Emeka Ibuka out of Ohio State. Those are guys who I think and I'm still kind of early in the process at that stage. It seems like those are guys who are decent, kind of reading coverages. That's one of the things you look for. You look for guys who could be maybe plug and play. So I think those are probably the two receivers that would be in that range. It's tough though. I mean, the receivers don't fall off trees, so you got to figure out a way to make it happen. Next question, John. Realistically, the Jets will not be able to fill all their needs this offseason. Is there a position group you'd like to see the Jets spend more resources on this year opposed to next year to help be more competitive? It's a great question, and it's not a position group. I think the Jets should be focused on playmakers, and those playmakers may be wide receivers. I don't know if there's a tight end available, but if there's a tight end available, maybe take a look. I don't know that the Jets are going to try and bring in a running back because they've got three young guys they like, but maybe be running back. The reason I say that it'd be playmakers is I think the offensive line's in decent shape. Quarterback we know is going to be a question mark. So let's make life as easy as possible for the quarterback if we can. If we can figure out a way to bring in a couple playmakers, and again they can play any position. You kind of try and lift that quarterback up. So that's the direction I'd look in. Another thing I'd say is this isn't quite what you asked, but I almost feel like we talk about all these quarterback options, and we know none of these options are great. So why not bring in two? Why not do what the Steelers did last year? The Steelers brought in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They brought it in a young guy with upside, and they brought in an older veteran who at least gives you a floor, even if he's going to be a short term guy. Even if he doesn't provide you with the upside you're looking for. Why not do that? Bring in a veteran, bring in a young guy, let them battle it out. And look, we know obviously the quarterback play was not great in Pittsburgh, but it was decent enough given the other strengths of the team that they were able to make the playoffs. So I think it's not quite what you asked, but I would probably look more at the quarterback position than other people. I wouldn't just bring in one guy. I'd bring in a couple guys who could be competitive, and maybe you catch lightning in a bottle in a way Pittsburgh did not. So those are that's another spot I think I might be interested in. Next question. If Darnold signs with the Vikings, would the Jets think about going after Daniel Jones with his mobility to open up the passing game and take pressure off the offensive line? I actually think Daniel Jones could be in the mix because, we've talked a lot about Justin Fields being the option. If you're looking for another potential reclamation project, and we're thinking in terms of maybe like Ryan Tannehill, you go back 5 years in Tennessee, or the Jets guys, another Darnold like Minnesota, or another Geno, Seattle, to a lesser extent Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay, who had success early in his career but kind of fell off and resurrected his career with the Bucks. If you're looking for a quarterback of that nature, then Daniel Jones might be the other choice behind Fields. Now, I will, in the nature of full disclosure, tell you I'm not a huge Daniel Jones fan. I've never been a huge Daniel Jones fan. Even that year the Giants made the playoffs with him, I didn't think he was that good. He got a lot of praise that year. I didn't think he was that good. And I remember thinking when the Giants gave him that big contract that the Giants had made a pretty big mistake. And I think it was justified. That said, the pickings are slim. And look, I think the Jets are going to sign a quarterback that you or I, nobody's going to love. Nobody's going to think the odds are that great that the quarterback's going to pan out. Jones has physical attributes. There have been a few fleeting moments where he's looked pretty good. I'll be honest with you. I think Fields has more upside. I think Fields has played better from what I've seen in his career. I think he's got more ability. I like what Fields adds as a rusher more. I know Jones is mobile, but Fields, takes it to another level. And I don't think the Jets are going to have a ton of competition for Fields because, the Jets can offer him a legitimate shot to start, which he's not going to see from a lot of teams. But I do think Jones might be kind of the fallback plan. If we're going with my veteran and my young guy plan and let them battle it out, Jones might be the second choice as like the reclamation project behind Fields. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will continue our weekly mailbag show. We'll talk about another possibility at the quarterback position, or at least a different way the Jets can go at the quarterback position, and whether it's a good way. Well, I'll explain what that means as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, given the likelihood of the Jets signing a guy in free agency and drafting a developmental quarterback, it got me thinking, how likely is it that this will actually work? It is hard enough to find a good quarterback in round one. Players like Prescott and Purdy are the exception, not the rule. What are your thoughts? Well, you're right about that. When you get to day 3, the odds of a quarterback working out are very low. So a couple things about this. I still think it's worth doing. Part of the reason it's worth doing is that even though it doesn't happen all that much, when it does when you do hit on a guy, it just has such an outsized good effect. This is an extreme example, so it's not exactly, the odds aren't exactly as long as this, but the odds of winning the lottery aren't very good. But if you do win it, it changes your life forever. So there are scenarios like where you actually, if you do the math, if you look at the expected outcomes, statisticians will tell you should play, even though you're probably going to lose your dollar, because just the reward, even though the odds of success are low, the outcome, the way everything changes for you if you do win makes it worth it. Another thing I'd say is that when you're talking about drafting a quarterback on day 3. That guy doesn't necessarily need to be a star for it to be a successful pick. The threshold for a day 3 pick to hit is quite low. If you draft a quarterback in the 6th round and he turns into a quality backup for you, that's an excellent pick. The guy who you can turn to for a couple of games to get you through a medium-term injury to your starting quarterback, that's an excellent outcome. The third thing I'd say is it's not like the odds are great at any other position later on in the draft. Now, I think quarterback, they're lower than other spots, but again, the impact of the quarterback hitting kind of cancels that out. But you're not like, I mean, unless you're talking about like a kicker or something or a fullback, I mean, you're probably not finding a good player in the later rounds of the draft. And even at those positions, you can probably find someone who's good as a non-drafted free agent. So I think that I like the principle. I don't think teams are aggressive enough at chasing quarterbacks. I think teams should be much more aggressive using their resources to try and find a quarterback. And I don't think teams do that enough. I'm a big fan of the Ron Wolf philosophy of you draft a quarterback every year. You just have to keep trying until you find somebody. That doesn't mean you have to draft a quarterback in round one every year. It doesn't mean that you have to overuse resources, but I think teams underuse resources at the quarterback position. Next question from Taylor. John, can you weigh your feelings about trading up versus trading down in this particular draft? I think most of us agree that trading down and accumulating picks is the right move for this team. However, many draft experts believe there are only 10 to 15 elite prospects in this year's draft, meaning the Jets may miss out on one of them by trading down even a few spots. What do you lean towards? I always lean towards trading down because the experts are wrong a lot on this stuff. Look, I think that given the uncertainties of the NFL draft, I mean, I always talk about how difficult it is. I mean, can you imagine projecting the next 10 years of anybody's life straight out of college? I mean, if you graduated college, I mean, if you've been out for a couple of years, think about what you would have predicted for your friends when you graduated. And odds are like their lives have turned out differently, and not necessarily better or worse, but odds are things have gone differently than you might have guessed. Now we're adding in components, playing professional football, guys who are making a lot of money, guys who are, playing against the elite athletes of the world, playing against better competition, playing more complex playbooks. And then there's just randomness. I mean, you can pick a guy who's, on a good path, and then an injury changes everything. And there are misevaluations for that reason. So yeah, the experts may say there's only 10 to 15 good players, but experts could be wrong about that. There's no guarantee the experts are correct about that. Look, I mean, there are obviously some very good prospects in this draft. Look, in 2019, if you go back 6 years, I was a big fan of the idea of the Jets trading down. They had the third overall pick that year, and I felt the Jets really needed to get a second round pick that year. Well, they had traded down, they would have missed out on Quinnen Williams. So obviously trading down is not right in every situation. The Jets are obviously better off that they kept the pick and drafted Quinnen Williams than they would have been trading down. But generally speaking, when you trade down, you win. Trading down is a better way to go than holding picks or trading up, and that's because of like the uncertainty. If things are uncertain, it's better to have more opportunities. It's better to have more guesses, and that's the thing people miss. I think is that they talk about the odds of hitting on what difference does it make if you're barely ever going to hit on a fifth round pick. So who cares if you trade a fifth round pick away? And on some level, that's not a terrible point to make. But on another level is if your odds are really low, well, isn't it better off for you to have 2 picks, 3 bites at the apple, 4? Because if you do that and you hit on a player, it has a big impact on your team. So, look, I've been pretty vocal that I'm a big fan of one particular prospect, Mason Graham out of Michigan. I like the player a lot. I think he's a dominant player. There's a lot I like about him. I also like his fit on the team. Jets put a second good defensive tackle next to Quinnen Williams. Jets haven't really done that. Jets have really kind of gone to the bargain bin. They've essentially assumed that the guy playing next to Quinnen is going to have success because Quinnen draws so much attention, gives them easier matchups. Worked well in 2022 with Sheldon Rankins. Worked well in 2023 with guys like Quinton Jefferson. Did not work so well in 2024 with Javon Kinlaw. And look, there's an argument to be made. There's a salary cap in this league. You've got to save money somewhere. So maybe guy next to Quinn is not the spot that you want to emphasize. But think about like putting a great defensive tackle next to Quinnen Williams, and think about the fact that either that guy or Quinnen Williams is going to get single blocked on every single play. It's pretty enticing. And I also like the age gap between the two of them because Quinnen Williams can be the go-to guy while Mason Graham learns his craft. And then as Quinnen ages and Mason Graham enters his prime, Graham can kind of take over the lead role. I like that dynamic potentially. So look, it's always tough to say. It's always a question of what you're getting in return. If somebody's offering you a 7th round pick to move down 10 slots, it's probably not worth your while. What I'd say is that teams underestimate the value of trading down and overestimate the value of trading up. So, never easy to say. There are no definitive answers on this, but generally speaking, look, I'm always going to be in favor of the Jets trading down. That's true of years where it's viewed as a very deep class, because if you trade down, you can still get an elite prospect. It's true of years where it's an average class, because in average years, it's typically a good idea to trade down the numbers show. And it's going to be true in years where the class is viewed as not as great, because there are still going to be diamonds in the rough. And to find these guys is going to be a little tougher, because the perception is that they're not that good, but they're still out there. So you want as many opportunities to find these guys as you can. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.